Every day, experienced workers clock in, trust the systems around them, and never clock out. These are the incidents born from invisible chains of small failures that turned steel, soil, and electricity into instruments of sudden, irreversible violence. It was April 11, 2016, on an urban high-rise job site for a mid-sized construction firm. Silas Hawthorne, 52, senior rigger, moved with measured economy born of decades around steel and wind. He was the reliable one, steady voice, conservative calls, the kind who checked knots twice. The morning lift plan covered a formwork bundle expected to weigh around 4,500 pounds. Overnight rain soaked the lumber, nudging reality closer to 5,600 pounds. A last-minute substitution slipped through without revised rigging math. Wind forecast sat at the edge of comfort, gusts tapping 25 miles per hour at jib height. Marta, 44, site supervisor, systematic and clipboard tight, audited the first picks. Leo, 33, the crane operator, cautious and deliberate, ran function checks. Anita, 26, signaler, precise with hand signals, tended the tagline. The exclusion zone was coned, though one cart gap remained open. Silas pointed out a frayed patch on the tagline and said he'd replace it after the first lift, according to crew statements. Chokers wrapped the bundle at 4 points under a spreader bar. 2 corners got edge protection, 2 did not. On paper, the load sat within the crane's chart. In practice, water weight and wind would punish margins. Load charts were verified for approximately 65 feet of radius, but gust loading and additional water weight were not factored into the lift capacity calculation. The crane took slack. The bundle rose clear. A gust laid into the stack, coaxing a slow yaw. Anita signaled for a temperate slew, and Silas adjusted position to keep the load off a perimeter column. Witnesses later told investigators that the wet sling at the heaviest corner crept, then slipped. Post-incident analysis confirmed that center of gravity shifted. The spreader bar twisted, loading the rigging hardware in a way the plan hadn't anticipated. According to Marta and Anita, who were watching the pick, Silas stepped slightly inside the swing radius to stabilize rotation with the tagline, a movement that placed him within the potential travel path of the suspended load. The frayed section, documented in photos after the incident, elongated under sudden tension, fibers singing and then parting. The load swung, caught by wind and momentum, yawing toward the column and then back, a lateral drift later estimated at roughly 3 to 4 feet. Footage from the tower deck camera, along with witness statements, showed that the dynamic load translated into the hook, the swing drawing a lower edge of the bundle across Silas's path. It struck across his chest and pelvis and pinned him to a guardrail post. The force folded the rail, sent shock through the ribs and spine, and inflicted crushing trauma to the torso. Leo eased the controls and later recalled that the bundle set down moments later, but the damage was immediate and profound. Breathing was shallow, then irregular, then absent. Marta initiated the emergency plan. Radios cleared the deck, CPR started and rotated. An AED analyzed, delivered a shock, and the cycle continued. Silas never regained a pulse on scene. The medical examiner later recorded traumatic asphyxia with severe internal hemorrhage consistent with blunt force crush. Post-incident weighing showed the bundle exceeded the planned pick weight by a significant margin at that boom angle and radius. Gusts near 25 miles per hour amplified the swing. The heaviest choker took more than its share because the angle factor had not been recalculated after the load change. The compromised tagline failed under shock load. The open cart gap compromised the barrier along the live lift corridor, increasing exposure if anyone strayed into the path. Each alone might have been survivable. Together, they were a chain. Corrections followed. No unweighed wet loads. No mid-shift substitutions without recalculated rigging. Taglines retired at the first sign of damage. Anemometer thresholds tied to automatic pauses, hard barriers around live lift corridors, independent verification of lift plans when field conditions changed. Silas's experience and careful choices operated inside a system that allowed small oversights to accumulate. The crew around him matched their reputations. A systematic supervisor, a cautious operator, a precise signaler. The day didn't fail because anyone was careless in isolation. It failed because the risk multiplied quietly until the physics finished the conversation. It was January 30th, 2017, in the central services area of a regional hospital where surgical instruments cycled through heat, pressure, and chemical fog before returning sterile to the operating rooms. Juniper Flores, 41, equipment technician, carried a reputation for methodical troubleshooting and a quiet intensity that made her the go-to for finicky machines. She had worked in sterile processing for nearly a decade. A service ticket flagged intermittent door interlock faults on one of the cart washer sterilizer units. Alarms had been silenced the prior week without documentation. A temporary do not use sign never made it to the machine at shift start. Darius, 39, department lead, checklist driven, briefed the maintenance backlog that morning. Neve, 24, new sterilization tech, conscientious staged instrument racks nearby. Roland, 58, a facility electrician, waited to inspect a thermal cutoff switch on an adjacent sterilizer. Juniper opened the side access panel to observe chain and sprocket movement during a diagnostic dry run, according to facility reports. The main disconnect was tagged out from the prior shift, red lock visible. The machine lacked a mechanical interlock between the access panel and drive mechanism, meaning internal motion could occur even when the panel was open. What wasn't locked was the auxiliary control circuit that kept the conveyor on standby power, a secondary path not included in the energy isolation. No group lockout briefing had been conducted. The floor was wet from prior cycles. She reached near the conveyor sprocket to observe sensor alignment while the control pendant sat in maintenance mode. A false ready state allowed the conveyor to advance when an upstream float switch reset unexpectedly. Her sleeve caught on an exposed set screw at the sprocket hub. The rotating assembly pulled her forearm into the pinch point between the chain and sprocket. Crush and avulsion-type trauma progressed rapidly. As the limb was drawn deeper, vascular structures ruptured. Blood loss began in volume. She lost balance on the wet floor and was pulled closer, the upper arm compressed against the frame. Darius hit the emergency stop. Residual momentum ceased after a brief delay. Neve removed power at the main disconnect. Roland applied a mechanical wedge to relieve chain tension. Juniper was freed within minutes. But the limb damage was catastrophic. A tourniquet was applied high on the upper arm. EMS transported her with IV fluid resuscitation initiated en route. Cardiac activity deteriorated despite aggressive intervention. She was pronounced deceased before arrival. Cause listed as hemorrhagic shock secondary to traumatic upper limb crush and avulsion. The investigation mapped the failure chain. The auxiliary control circuit had remained energized despite the main disconnect being tagged and locked. Group lockout procedures had not been performed. Zero energy verification for control voltage was not conducted, and the exposed set screw was unguarded. The wet floor contributed to the loss of balance. No standoff tools were used. The facility overhauled its safety program within weeks. Guards enclosed all sprockets. Zero energy verification expanded to control circuits with mandatory metering. Group lockout briefings became cross-disciplinary. Red tag locks were restricted to supervisors, and floor drainage was rebuilt to prevent future slips. Juniper's death redefined what the department considered safe. Routine maintenance became an exercise in verification, not assumption. Each lock, tag, and test was performed with a deliberate pause, an acknowledgement that unseen energy could still move behind steel and protocol. The system changed, but so did the people who worked within it. It was September 22, 2015, at a municipal water treatment facility where the rhythm of pumps and clarifiers ran around the clock. Reese O'Connell, 39, maintenance mechanic, was known for his steady hands and calm demeanor. He had worked at the facility for 11 years and knew the permit-required confined spaces by heart. His wife, Genevieve Stone, 37, worked as an administrative coordinator at the same facility, meticulous with paperwork and known for her attention to procedural detail. The task that morning was to inspect residue buildup inside a covered sludge pit, a permit-required confined space with a history of hydrogen sulfide accumulation. Omar, 46 shift lead, was assigned as attendant Tessa. 29 lab tech was on site to collect samples. The confined space entry permit had been filled out, but recent calibration proof for the fixed gas monitors was missing. The isolation valve for a process line was tagged as closed, but a secondary upstream block valve was not included in the permit. The fixed hydrogen sulfide monitor panel displayed a steady green indicator. No cross-check with a second portable detector was performed. A ventilation blower was staged, but airflow was not verified. Genevieve had delivered work orders earlier that morning. Security footage later showed her near the instrument panel corridor, where the gas monitor controls were housed. She had level 2 keyed access granted for administrative coordination. Reese opened the hatch and lowered a tripod with a retrieval winch. He clipped his retrieval line and descended arring a half-mask respirator fitted with organic vapor cartridges, appropriate for nuisance odors, but wholly inadequate for hydrogen sulfide or oxygen-deficient atmospheres. The entry permit had incorrectly classified the atmosphere as nuisance odor only, leading him to select the wrong level of respiratory protection. The ventilation duct delivered weak airflow. Omar began the entry log, but stepped away briefly. He moved a few steps down the corridor to answer a radio call from operations. Within the pit, Reese knelt near the inlet elbow to scrape residue. A process upset upstream introduced gas into the line, despite the tagged valve. The upstream block valve, later found to be passing under pressure, allowed hydrogen sulfide to enter the space. The fixed monitor remained on green. The portable detector clipped to Reese's belt was in an inhibit state that suppressed alarms. Later testing confirmed that the fixed monitor's test function had been overridden, preventing it from registering the rise in gas concentration. Reese experienced rapid exposure to hydrogen sulfide in an oxygen-deficient atmosphere. Respiration became ineffective within seconds. He slumped against the ladder rail. No verbal response came over the radio. Omar returned and attempted non-entry retrieval using the tripod winch. The line snagged on an interior bracket. Reese remained within the space for several minutes. Under a toxic atmosphere, emergency services were called. The responding team initiated supplied air entry and extracted Reese to the deck. Advanced life support was attempted. He was pronounced deceased. The primary cause listed as acute hydrogen sulfide poisoning with rapid respiratory failure. Investigators later determined that the fixed hydrogen sulfide monitor had been left in a test override mode following maintenance the prior week. Access log data showed no subsequent verification, and the configuration change went unnoticed. Without the required cross-check from a portable detector, the system never alarmed. The city reviewed all facility access protocols and restructured oversight to ensure that gas monitor configuration changes required dual authorization. Reese didn't die because he ignored the procedure. He entered a space that appeared safe on paper, but wasn't in practice. A monitor left in test override mode, an incorrect respiratory classification on the permit, and a missed cross-check allowed a lethal atmosphere to form. Without warning, his death reshaped how the facility approached confined space hazards, forcing every department to treat verification, not assumption, as the only acceptable standard. It was March 17, 2018, at a local distribution warehouse where inventory moved through narrow aisles stacked 4 levels high. Elaine Vance, 34, inventory coordinator, was known for her precision with cycle counts and her habit of double-checking discrepancies. She had worked at the warehouse for 6 years, knew the layout by memory, and was methodical, patient, and trusted to work independently. The morning had started with a backlog of cycle counts in aisle 9, a section flagged weeks earlier for a bent upright on the racking system. The damage had been marked with orange tape, and a repair order had been issued, but the work was deferred to avoid downtime. Greg, 31, forklift operator, cooperative and steady, was on site to replenish upper-tier pallets. Priya, 42, safety officer, analytical, was conducting an audit of aisle clearances. Hank, 50, maintenance tech, pragmatic, was on site to replace the damaged upright later that day. The bent upright in aisle 9 had been struck by equipment weeks prior. 2 anchor bolts at the base plate had loosened, and the plate was warped. The area had been tagged, but not barricaded. Temporary braces had been removed the prior week and were not reinstalled. Overloaded pallets sat above the manufacturer's recommended capacity. Manufacturer data rated the racking for approximately 2,500 pounds per level. Measurements after the incident indicated some levels exceeded that limit by roughly 20%. Eleni conducted her cycle count at mid-rack level using a rolling ladder platform. Greg staged his forklift to lift a replacement pallet to the 4th level. Hank had unbolted additional hardware in preparation, but had not yet closed the aisle. Aisle traffic control cones were set, but the lane wasn't fully closed. Greg approached the bay with the forklift. The mast nudged a misaligned pallet at level 3. The load shifted. A pallet foot pressed against an already bent beam connector. The connector failed, dropping part of the load onto the beam below and creating a progressive overload. The compromised upright rotated outward. A partial rack collapse initiated, pushing inventory into the aisle Eleni occupied. Eleni attempted to descend from the rolling platform. The platform was struck by a sliding pallet before she could clear the area. She fell from mid-height. A heavy case impacted her back and pinned her against the platform rail. The cascade continued, depositing additional cartons around and against her torso and lower extremities. Injuries included multiple rib fractures, spinal fractures at the thoracic level, and restrictive asphyxia due to compressive load. Greg reversed the forklift. Priya initiated the emergency response and directed partial debris removal. EMS arrived and continued extrication. Eleni was pronounced deceased on scene from compressive asphyxia and traumatic injuries. The failure chain became clear during the investigation. Weeks earlier, temporary braces had been removed to restore forklift access and were never put back. Orange tape marked the damaged upright, but no barricade or repair followed. Pallets stacked on multiple levels exceeded what the manufacturer rated as safe. Traffic cones marked the aisle, but no hard closure prevented personnel from entering during maintenance preparation. Immediate and comprehensive policies were implemented. Any structural repair now requires full aisle closure with physical barriers. The facility implemented camera-assisted pallet placement to reduce contact incidents and instituted annual racking integrity audits with documented load compliance checks. It was August 25, 2016, at a utility trench excavation site for a mid-sized civil contractor where a new water main was being installed beneath a residential street. Kellen Stone, 28, pipe layer, was known for his efficiency and his willingness to work the difficult positions that required precision and patience. He had been in the trade for 7 years, understood soil behavior, and was steady, focused, and respected by the crew. The trench that morning was approximately 9 feet deep, cut through Type C soil that had been saturated by rainfall 2 days prior. No trench shield or shoring system had yet been installed at Kellen's work position, leaving both walls unsupported during active pipe placement. Rosa, 36, 4-person, disciplined and schedule-driven, was on site to meet a milestone. Devin, 27, spotter, attentive, was on site to guide excavator movements. Ahmed, 55, inspector, procedural, was on site to verify bedding depth and pipe alignment. A trench box was available, but had not yet been positioned at Kellen's location. The soil classification was Type C, with visible groundwater seepage along one wall. A spoil pile sat within a few feet of the trench lip. The ladder at the entry point did not extend 36 inches above the lip. Traffic vibration from a nearby road was noticeable throughout the morning. Kellen entered the trench to set a section of PVC pipe and verify the bedding thickness. The excavator was parked with the boom stowed. Rosa reviewed the schedule with Ahmed at the surface. Devin monitored the perimeter and noted minor slumping near the spoil pile, but did not call for a halt. Kellen knelt near the bottom to check the bedding and align the bell end of the pipe. A small slump released gravel into the trench near his knees. A vertical crack developed in the saturated wall along a natural seam. The wall failed rapidly, sending a large volume of soil into the trench. Kellen was knocked sideways and buried to the chest, then fully as material continued to flow. The spoil pile contributed additional load, accelerating the collapse. Devon called out and signaled the excavator operator to stand down. Rosa ordered a non-entry rescue while assessing the trench for secondary collapse risk. Shoveling began carefully once the wall was deemed stable. Ahmed coordinated with emergency services, who arrived with air monitoring equipment and vacuum excavation support. Extrication proceeded cautiously. After an extended effort, Kellen recovered with no spontaneous breathing or pulse. He was pronounced deceased on scene, cause listed as compressive asphyxia secondary to trench wall collapse. Root causes emerged during the investigation. At 9 feet deep in saturated Type C soil, the trench had no protective system in place. Spoil material sat within 2 feet of the edge, adding a surcharge load to an already unstable wall. The egress ladder fell short of the required 36-inch extension above the lip. Groundwater seepage had compromised the soil structure. Vibration from nearby traffic contributed to the triggering event. No competent person inspection had been performed that morning despite rainfall 2 days prior. Comprehensive changes followed immediately. Trench boxes became mandatory for excavations beyond 5 feet in unstable soils. Spoil piles were required at least 2 feet from trench edges. Competent person inspections were mandated daily and after weather events. Ladder extensions were verified before entry, and traffic control measures minimized vibration near excavations. The contractor implemented stop-work authority training and required pre-dig shoring plans with third-party review for deep excavations. Kellen's loss became a measure for how narrow the margins had become between working fast and working safe. It was December 5th, 2017, in the mechanical room of an office tower managed by a property services company, where electrical panels, transfer switches, and a backup generator kept the building operational. Willa Sterling, 37, electrical technician, was known for her methodical approach to troubleshooting and her reputation for completing work ahead of schedule. She had worked in commercial building systems for 9 years and was trusted to handle complex panel work independently. She was precise, confident, and respected. The task that morning was to service a distribution panel neutral bus and inspect a suspect ground bond. The panel was a 480/277 volt 3-phase enclosure, typical for commercial building distribution, with both neutral and equipment ground conductors accessible at the working depth. Conrad, 45, building engineer, orderly, was on site to coordinate a generator test. Nia, 32, controls technician, methodical, was on site to verify building automation system alarms. Eli, 40, security supervisor, was on site for access control. Willa locked out the feeder breaker, applied her personal lock, and verified the tag. Conrad confirmed the generator was in automatic mode but not scheduled to run during the maintenance window. A temporary lighting circuit remained connected upstream through an unlabeled backfeed path installed weeks earlier by a tenant contractor. The tie-in had not been documented on the one-line diagram. Willa verified the absence of voltage at the expected points using her non-contact tester and contact meter, but did not detect the alternate path on a different lug. Willa removed the panel cover and began work on the neutral bus and ground bond area. She used a screwdriver to loosen a terminal while steadying herself with her other hand on the panel edge. A routine building load fluctuation prompted the generator to exercise due to an auto test setting that had been left active. The transfer switch shifted partially, energizing the backfeed path through the undocumented tie-in. Current traveled through the screwdriver and across Willa's upper body to the ground. No arc flash occurred. The current path was direct through the conductive tool and body, producing an immediate fibrillation response rather than a thermal event. She experienced immediate electrical injury with loss of muscular control and collapsed to the floor. Conrad hit the emergency stop on the generator. Nia verified the building automation system now displayed a power anomaly alarm. Eli called for emergency medical services. Conrad began CPR, while Nia retrieved an automated external defibrillator. The AED analyzed Willa's heart rhythm and advised a shock. Defibrillation was delivered, and CPR continued in cycles, Additional shocks were administered upon the arrival of emergency medical services. Despite resuscitation efforts, return of spontaneous circulation was not achieved. Willa was pronounced deceased on scene. Cause listed as ventricular fibrillation and cardiac arrest due to electrical shock. The failure sequence unfolded through multiple overlooked hazards. A tenant contractor had connected temporary lighting on the load side of the automatic transfer switch without documentation, establishing a hidden energized pathway. The generator's scheduled auto exercise remained active in the system. When the transfer switch began its self-test cycle, it momentarily powered the undocumented backfeed circuit. Willa's voltage checks focused on the primary connection points. She had not tested every terminal, neutral, and ground for the absence of voltage. No lockout procedure had been applied to disable the generator's automatic operation mode. Strict prohibition of undocumented connections was enforced. Test before touch procedures were expanded to include testing across all lugs. Dual technician verification was instituted. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.